Welcome, everyone. My name is Charles Chamberlain, and I'm the Executive Director of Democracy for America. We're honored to be joined tonight by Senator Jeff Merkley, by NARAL Pro-Choice America President Ilyse Hogue, and DFA Chair Jim Dean for what promises to be a fantastic conversation. Now, before I bring Senator Merkley and Ilyse Hogue on the call, I want to make sure you know that they would love to take your questions tonight. If you'd like to ask a question, please press 0 on your phone, and you'll be connected with a DFA staff member. So again, that's press 0 right now if you'd like to ask a question. If you're listening to this call on democracyforamerica.com, you can also submit a question through the live web stream, which is on your right. Almost 1 year ago today, President Obama nominated Merrick Garland to fill the empty Supreme Court seat left after the passing of Justice Scalia. Now, Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, made the cynical and unprecedented decision to completely block this nomination and refuse to hold even a single hearing. Now we're faced with Neil Gorsuch, an ultra-right-wing conservative nominee who is ruled to the right of Justice Scalia. Senate Democrats face a choice. Will they stand up against this extremist judge and a stolen Supreme Court pick, or will they allow Republicans to enact their extremist right-wing agenda without even a fight? Now, thankfully, we have some progressive champions who are leading the fight already against Gorsuch. So let's get this started. I'd like to welcome our chair, Jim Dean, to the call. Jim, you there?
Charles, I sure am, and thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody on this call for taking time out of your schedules to join us this evening. And I especially want to thank Ilyse Hogue and Senator Jeff Merkley for taking time out of their very busy schedules to join us. This is a tough situation, and I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our first guest, Senator Jeff Merkley, because from the very beginning, Senator Merkley has made it clear that he would do everything in his power, including using the filibuster, to stop any Supreme Court justice not named Merrick Garland. And he knows that this is a stolen seat, as we all do, and that the Democrats need to stand together to oppose Donald Trump's pick. And on this issue and very many others, we are so grateful to Senator Merkley for his great leadership. We are certainly very, very grateful to Ilyse Hogue for her terrific leadership on this and so many other issues. And it is my honor and distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Senator Jeff Merkley. Senator, thanks so much again for being on the call.
You bet. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Charles, and mostly thank you to everyone who's joining in, because our democracy, our democratic republic, absolutely needs a lot of citizen engagement if we're going to put the nation back on its axis. I wanted to share with you a couple thoughts about this Supreme Court process and nomination. Let's understand first that never before in American history has a majority in the Senate, majority party in the Senate, refused to consider and address a presidential nominee when there was enough time to do so. And there was plenty of time last year. And this is what's unique. They did not send it to committee. They did not hold a committee debate. The committee did not vote. It did not go to the floor. It was not debated on the floor. The nomination of Merrick Garland got zero attention from the majority. And this was a violation of the Senate oath of office to execute our responsibilities under the Constitution, because we have this advice and consent responsibility, and I don't think there's anywhere we should take it more seriously than with the Supreme Court. So the Senate majority, led by Mitch McConnell, they took this seat, they put it in a time capsule, and they fast-forwarded it to the next administration, hoping that it would be a time capsule opened by a Republican president who would nominate a far-right nominee. And unfortunately for our entire nation, that is exactly what has happened. And so this is a stolen seat, and therefore it makes the process illegitimate. It only becomes legitimate if the Senate majority says we're going to set this aside and ask the president to nominate Merrick Garland and have him considered first. And I know nobody's holding their breath for that to happen. It is something I called on the president to do before he nominated our current nominee, Neil Gorsuch, but it didn't happen. So that is a terrible precedent. It's a very damaging precedent for the Senate, which has failed to exercise its responsibility under the Constitution, and it's a terrible impact on the Supreme Court that will haunt it for decades to come. Because if one party steals a seat under one situation, how do you balance the scales later on When do you say, well, it was justified then, it's justified now? And also recognize this is a court-packing scheme. This is a scheme to pack the court, and if it succeeds, the parties in the future will be tempted to do it again. So it's wrong, it's damaging, and the way to stop it is to stop the successful confirmation of this nominee. Now, we know that there is another shadow hanging over this nominee, and that is that right now there is an investigation of the Trump campaign for potential collaboration with the Russians in interfering in the U.S. presidential election. We had the FBI testify, and they came on Monday morning, the leader Comey, and he put forward that there are multiple investigations underway. Therefore, the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, went to the floor and said, while this cloud is over the presidency of potential collaboration with the Russians in the U.S. presidential campaign, we should suspend this consideration of the nominee from this president. And I agree with that completely. And then we have a third level. And this third level is that the nominee himself is from the far right. The Washington Post analysis put him to the right of anyone who is currently on the court. And when you look at his statements, when you look at his decision, it's clear to see why. He hates the idea of class action lawsuits being used to hold corporations accountable for predatory conduct or illegal conduct because they're an inconvenience to a corporation. He dislikes the idea of LGBTQ community using the courts to pursue issues of opportunity. Well, where is the stand of the Constitution against discrimination? And quite frankly, this is just confounds me. We have a Constitution with a vision of equality and opportunity, and it's up to the Supreme Court to call exactly where the line is, and we only find out by taking a case to the courts. And so, of course, our individual groups should be able to take their concerns about discrimination to the courts. And the list goes on with decisions that are offensive to women and want to allow corporations to control their access to reproductive care. Citizens United and dark money, this judge is very, very friendly with the teams that have put this really policy corrupting dark money into our campaigns. He has found in cases like the one with the truck driver who was denied compensation by Gorsuch because he was fired from his job when he was actually freezing and took good stewardship of his truck, but drove the cab to get warm and returned when help arrived for his broken down truck. And you'd have to hear all the details to recognize how offensive Gorsuch's decision was in that case. And by the way, he had a case that today was overturned by the Supreme Court 8-0. So that was a rather dramatic moment in the course that actually happened while the Senate Judiciary Committee was considering him today. So when you have somebody who's to the right of Alito and to the right of Thomas and to the right of deceased member Judge Scalia, you know that you are going to have an individual who is fighting for a vision of the Constitution that is inconsistent with the core premise of the Constitution. That core premise is that we are a we the people nation. We are not government of, by, and for the powerful and the privileged. But every decision Gorsuch makes and every connection he's had in life has been about advancing the privileged and the powerful. So for each of these three reasons, we need to stop. We need to make sure that this nomination does not succeed. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Senator Merkley. We're also, before we get to questions, I also want to make sure that we know we're honored to be joined by President of NARAL Pro-Choice America, Ilyse Hogue. Ilyse has a long history of progressive activism with organizations ranging from Move On to Media Matters. And as president of NARAL, she has organized the People's Defense, a powerful coalition of progressive organizations, which includes Democracy for America, who are working to mobilize Americans against Gorsuch. Now, Ilyse is calling in from the airport in the middle of her typical cross-country traveling, fighting for women's reproductive rights. So please forgive any extra noise, but I'd like to welcome you to the call. Ilyse, you there?
I am here, and as Charles said, forgive any background noise, but there is no more important place for me to be than on this call right now, even though I am in the airport in Chicago. And the reason for that is because DFA is such a critical partner in this fight and every fight. You guys have been on the front line where other progressive groups have actually shied away from the fight for abortion rights. You guys have stood arm in arm with women across this country, recognizing that our fundamental rights are at stake. As Senator Merkley said, we are living in unprecedented times. And one of the unprecedented things that has occurred is we have a president who on the campaign trail actually stated a litmus test for his Supreme Court nominees. And that litmus test was a justice willing to vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. And Justice Gorsuch definitely fits that bill. And so the stakes are incredibly high right now. As Senator Merkley, who has been on the front lines of this from the beginning, stated, this guy is skating by on that. How many times have we heard he's a nice guy, he loves his wife? In fact, Politico ran a whole story about how he loves puppies. That is an incredibly low bar, and they're trying to obfuscate his extreme views. One of the things that Senator Merkley said, which is so important to recognize, is it's not just the Senate majority that invested time, money, and energy in delaying this fight till they could get their own justice on the court, but there is a large dark money group believed to be backed by the Koch brothers who spent upwards of $10 million to rob Merrick Garland of his seat, and they are now leading the charge in getting Justice Gorsuch or Judge Gorsuch his Supreme Court seat. And the reason for that is this is the holy grail for them. This is where they're able to enshrine Trump's horrific, misogynistic, racist, xenophobic agenda for a lifetime. This is a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, and for them, this is the holy grail. And they have pursued a strategy of chaos and distraction. It's not a coincidence that they timed the Russia investigations alongside the confirmation hearings, believing that people would not pay attention. But we're paying attention. We delivered with Senator Merkley there on a very cold day last week in D.C., 1 million petition signatures to all 100 senators saying that this judge must be blocked. He is not representative of what we need as Americans to secure all of our rights as determined by the Constitution, and he must be blocked. We get asked a lot of questions of like, this is Scalia seat. Well, guess what? There's no such thing as somebody owning a seat. We should judge each justice and judicial nominee by their own merits, and this guy does not pass the test, right? And as I've been reminding senators in all of my conversations, 5 million women and all of our male allies did not march in the streets in the largest demonstration in U.S. history not 2 months ago for our senators to fight the next time. The fight is now. The fight is here. The fight is present, and the Democratic senators have no mandate to gamble away our future on an extreme justice. Now, this is a very, very fluid environment. I will 100% underscore what Senator Merkley said, which is as soon as we heard Jim Comey testify that there is an ongoing investigation into the collusion between the Trump administration and a hostile foreign state, we were out calling for delay. They attacked President Obama's legitimacy to nominate a Supreme Court justice based on nothing more than the fact that he had a year left in his term. We now have the entire legitimacy of an election at stake, and we should absolutely not move forward with any further nominations, especially one that is a lifetime appointment until we get to the bottom of this Russia situation. And barring a delay, we are asking every single Democratic senator to use everything in their power, especially the filibuster, to block this nomination. Now, we have breaking news that literally came through about an hour ago that some Democrats are considering a deal. That deal would look like, hey, we'll give you this one if you promise not to use the nuclear option on the next one. No deal. There will be no deal. You are not and I'm not talking to Senator Merkley, who has been ahead of this, but no senator is empowered to deal away our rights and our future. They have no mandate to do that, certainly not at a time where hour by hour we're getting more information about the Russia investigation. They should stop the proceedings now, and short of stopping the proceedings, they should do everything in their power to block this nomination. The only thing that is going to matter is senators hearing loud and clear from incredibly passionate, engaged people like DFA members alongside with NARAL members and all of our People's Defense Coalition that they want you want them to do everything in their power to block this nomination. We not only had the petition delivery, we've had calls pouring into offices all week, and we have a day of action on April 1st called the People's Filibuster, which we hope you will all join in your hometowns and home states, making sure that the people's voices are the ones governing this process, particularly at this precarious time in our democracy. So I will stop there and hand the call back to Charles, and I look forward to taking your questions.
So let's get this straight. We've got one, it's a stolen seat. Two, we have an FBI investigation into election collusion with a foreign government by the Trump administration. And number three, this guy is the most right-wing extremist that we've ever had attempted to be placed on the court. To me, that's 3 strikes we're out. But I guess if the Washington Post says that he loves puppies, maybe we should just go ahead and do this. No, I think not. If you'd like to ask questions, please press 0 on your phone. You'll be connected with a DFA staffer. Again, if you press 0 right now and because you'd like to ask a question, you'll go to a DFA staffer. They'll talk a bit about you, and we'll see if we can get your question live on this call. And if you're listening to this call on democracyforamerica.com, you can also submit a question through the live web stream to your right. So let's get straight to some phone calls here. We've got Barella from Pennsylvania. Are you on the line?
Yes.
Great. Well, go ahead and ask your question.
My question's for Senator Merkley. I want to know how united the Democrats are, which she kind of just answered. But I also want to know what power do you feel like you have as far as his nomination?
Okay, you bet. Well, first, if we frame this in the context of the battle to come, we have 48 Democrats and independents who make up the Democratic caucus. And in order to block the closing of debate, which that is what a filibuster is to block the closing of debate, we have to have 41 senators, which means that we can lose a few and still shut down or prevent the nomination of Gorsuch. And as you just heard, there was an article that came out today saying some senators are looking at the possibility of a conversation with Republicans in which they would essentially agree to shut down debate, which would enable Gorsuch to be nominated in exchange from a couple of Republican senators to vote against changing the rules when the next U.S. U.S. Supreme Court seat becomes open. This is a huge mistake for senators to engage in this type of speculation that a couple individuals will join in blocking the rules from being changed at a future date, a year or 2, 3 years from now. Those senators may not even be serving in the Senate, and you would have to have all of them to have effect. And so in essence, such a deal would say, yes, we are going to allow there to be a 5-4 court now that will proceed to be a court for the powerful and the privileged rather than for the people. What kind of a deal is that? It means we will lose on every single decision going forward, as we have over most of the decisions in the last several years. It's a terrible idea. I hope that we're able to talk to the senators who are considering making that type of arrangement and stop it. But certainly we have got to maintain 41. I'm pretty confident. I feel in my heart we will absolutely have 41 senators to block closing debate. And then the question becomes, will the Republicans change the rule? And will they change it to a simple majority to close debate? And we don't know the answer to that. But what we do know is that if we don't fight, if we don't filibuster, if we don't keep those 41 senators in place, it doesn't matter because we'll never get to that decision point. We will have lost right from the start. And it isn't an easy deal to change the rule. And by that I mean this. Imagine you're a Republican senator and you know that Trump has one Supreme Court nominee opportunity, but the next president might have three, and that next president might be a Democrat. Do you want to give up the supermajority standard under those circumstances? And my feeling is a lot of folks would not want to give it up. So it's not a foregone conclusion that the Republicans would change the rule.
That really makes a lot of sense and a great point. I have a question here that I think is probably pretty much for Ilyse here from Ann in Nevada. Ann, are you on the call?
Yeah, hi. Actually, I have a couple of questions. The first one is I'm interested in knowing which of the Democratic senators are talking about making a deal. Because I know my senator, at least from what I've seen that she's sent out, Senator Cortez Masto, is not interested in making a deal with the Republicans. So I think people in those states need to know who they are so they can get on the phone. And I assume it's somebody like Senator Manchin, who's almost...
That's a really great question. So because you were a little quiet and breaking up a little bit, I'm just going to repeat. The question for you, Ilyse, is do you know who the senators are that are thinking about making a deal so that we can target them, especially with pressure?
So they're floating this namelessly right now. It is really important that there is a huge chorus of voices that are saying no deal at all. We can guess some of them based on prior voting history and from the states that they're in, but we certainly intend to send a clear, unified message about no deal. I want to offer two other things to add on to what Senator Merkley said. Minority Leader Schumer made a great point in a press conference last week, and what he said is, if you can't get 60 votes for your nominee, you change the nominee, you don't change the rules. And all of the polling shows that the American people agree with this. There is a reason that we have a high threshold for Supreme Court justices. It is because they have lifetime appointments and because they have a huge burden of responsibility to represent all of us. And therefore, as Senator Merkley said, lots of Republicans who would be required to vote to change the rules have a lot of reasons not to do so. And then the last thing I want to say, Ann, since you're from Nevada, I have no reason to believe that Senator Cortez Masto is on the deal, but I do think that she needs to hear from you that you want her to filibuster and that you don't want a deal being made, but you also have a really unique opportunity because you have Senator Heller, who is one of these Republicans up for re-election in a state that just went blue from top of the ticket to the bottom of the ticket. He's got to be reading the political tea leaves, and so it's super important that he hear from you and not just the Democratic senators.
That is absolutely a critical point. This is a time when it's really important to remember that pressuring Republicans is just as worthwhile as pressuring the Democrats. And the reason isn't just because some of those Republicans might even be able to be convinced to be flipped, like the ones like Heller or Jeff Flake in Arizona or Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski. It's not just about the ones that might actually even be able to flip. It's also about getting the other ones to not stand up as strong as they might if they think that they can go without any kind of repercussions. We've seen it over and over again in fight after fight. A Republican might be speaking up, might be talking out and saying something, and often something stupid, and then they get smacked down by their constituents. Even if they don't change their vote, just getting smacked down makes them significantly less strong, makes them much weaker when they're trying to fight in the room. And that's exactly what we need if it comes to a point where they're talking about whether or not to get rid of the filibuster. They're going to need every one of those Republicans to vote with them to make that happen. And they're a lot less likely to do that if they've heard from their constituents. I have a quick follow-up question. It's something that we keep hearing from our members, which is, what if we block Gorsuch? Isn't it possible Trump just nominates somebody worse? I mean, is that something you think we should be worried about, Senator Merkley?
Well, just to repeat your point, the concern is that if we defeat him, somebody worse will be nominated. If somebody worse is nominated, then the timeline, we're months into the future where we know a lot more about Trump's dealings with the Russians in the campaign. So all sorts of things can unfold that might change the dynamics. In addition, if somebody worse than Gorsuch is nominated, and we've defeated Gorsuch, we're going to stand strong against the next nominee who's worse. The message to the president will be, you want someone concerned, that person needs to be, or confirmed, you need to have that person be Merrick Garland.
Excellent.
Charles, can I add on that?
Please.
I think this whole line of reasoning that somebody might be worse is to actually elide over how extreme Judge Gorsuch is, right? When you're out there talking about some fictional worse justice, you're sort of saying he's not that bad. And actually his record shows entirely the opposite. So we should reject that at face value because you just have to look at this guy to know that it can't get much worse.
Yeah, well, I echo that. Ilyse nailed that. That's exactly right.
Well said, Ilyse. All right, and let's take another question about the filibuster from Tom in Minnesota. Tom, you there?
Yes. Hi. Good evening.
Fantastic. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. So my question is, so how can people that live in fairly solid blue states like myself in Minnesota help get the word out to folks that live in more moderate, kind of middle-of-the-road states, on both sides of the aisle, like you just mentioned, Nevada, where you've got Dean Heller, who's a key vote here, especially on the 60-vote cloture rule, and then there are Democrats, obviously, that we need to step up and filibuster. How can we help get the word out? I know during the election there were opportunities to call folks in other states. Is there something like that, or are there other ways that we can help get the word out to key states?
Well, Tom, I can give you my opinion on this, Senator Merkley, and that is the first two things you should think about doing is first your social network, any connections you have with family or friends in other states or folks who might read your blog or your Facebook or so forth. Tell them how you feel and ask them to contact their House and Senate members who might very well, in this case, Senate members, who might very well be Republican, and ask them to use their social networks to spread that word as well. The second is, if you have any professional association, realtors, teachers, nurses, you name it, there's thousands of these connections. Ask your association to take a stand and to push the National Association to weigh in and encourage members to call in. And those are the best two ways to get phone calls and letters going in other states where you might have somebody who's planning to vote for Gorsuch.
Ilyse, you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. First of all, congratulations for being from Minnesota. We think that both Senator Klobuchar and Senator Franken have done fabulous in their role as Judiciary Committee members in really asking the tough questions and not letting Judge Gorsuch off the hook. And at the same time, not because we don't believe they're with us, but it is worth recognizing that neither of those senators have publicly stated that they're going to filibuster this nomination. So do not assume that they don't want to hear from you. In fact, we've been hearing from caucus members that they want to hear from their constituents where they are on this issue, but don't stop there. And Charles will have to answer what DFA is capable of doing, but at NARAL, we are engaged in member-to-member calling. So, in Massachusetts, we have both senators out saying that they're going to filibuster the nomination. So we have our Massachusetts members calling our members in Missouri, patching them through to Claire McCaskill's office, and we're going to continue to do that through the duration.
That's fantastic. Ilyse, we certainly are doing lots of activism on this, but we're not doing member-to-member calling at the moment. Is that something that DFA members could sign up to do at your website to do through NARAL?
Absolutely, and I'll get you the unique link, and Charles, you can share that with folks. But you can also go to NARAL's website. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, let's, within the last hour, CNN is reporting that the FBI has information showing possible collaboration between Russia and the Trump campaign. And as we already know from Comey's testimony the other day, the FBI says that they are investigating such a collaboration. So I've got a question here from Mary in Indiana. Mary, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Great. Go ahead and ask your question.
I want to know other things that we can do to hold this seat from being nominated. I know I've called my senators. I've called both of them. I'm from Indiana, and it's a red state. I got one senator.
Oh, looks like we lost, darn it. Looks like we lost Mary. I know that Mary was getting around in her question to ask specifically with their concern of Russian involvement, how can we stop this nomination using specifically the Russian involvement as a tool to make that happen?
So I think that there is not a clear answer to that because at this moment, we're learning more day by day, but my argument is, and this is really repeating what Chuck Schumer has said, is that given that the FBI has said that investigations, plural, are underway, and given the trickle of news that keeps building from one point to another, that there was significant, we don't yet know how substantial or extensive, but significant contacts between the campaign and the Russians, it casts a cloud over the legitimacy of President Trump's election, because should it be the case, I'm not saying it is the case, but should it be the case that his team conspired with the Russians to change the outcome of the U.S. election, that is traitorous conduct. And that would certainly affect the legitimacy of his proposal for a Supreme Court justice. And so that is why, for folks to weigh in on this thought with their Senate members, saying, hold on, this should be put on ice until this investigation is completed. This is a very significant issue. An attack on Russia, by Russia, on the United States, through cyber warfare, to attack our fundamental election institutions, the foundation of our democratic republic. This cannot be taken lightly. When we've got to get to the bottom of it before this president has a nominee confirmed to the Supreme Court. To take that message to your senators in every fashion, by phone call, by email, would be wonderful. Go to town halls, demand town halls, go to their offices in your home states, weigh in with them, and let them know that if you have a drop of patriotic concern for the integrity of our government, we should put this on hold until we get to the bottom of this potential collaboration between the Trump campaign and the Russians.
And I agree with everything Senator Merkley said, and I would just add letters to the editor. They're very powerful, they're very public, and they really matter. The one thing that Republicans don't want is to be linked to this Russia mess. And so the delay message publicly in the newspapers is very powerful.
That's right on, Mark. I want to add on that, Ilyse, to say that, one of the things that I hear from people, they're like, oh, I write letters to the editor all the time and they never get printed. One thing that's really important to remember is that letters to the editor are one of the ways in which your newspaper figures out what their readers want to hear about. So even if they don't print your letter, you can trust that they are counting up the topics, the concepts that are being written into them, and that is impacting the bottom line of what they're actually printing in their newspaper. They do this because just like any other business, they're trying to sell papers, and they want to make sure they market to the people that are already reading their papers. So don't hesitate for a second to ask questions, to write letters to the editor of your newspaper. It has an impact. Ilyse, we've gotten a lot of questions coming in online where people are asking some questions about the extremist record of Neil Gorsuch, and specifically what keeps coming up over and over again is the question of Roe versus Wade. How is it that we know that he is going to be a bad vote on that issue? Can you explain that to people?
So there are a couple ways that we know. First is that that's what Trump pledged to nominate, and we don't think he would have any reason to go back on his promise to an extreme wing of his base. The second is he comes from a long tradition of the Heritage Foundation, as well as is an acolyte of justices who were very, very hostile towards Roe. And then the third way is his record itself. He has three very, very significant rulings on this. One is the Hobby Lobby ruling, or I should say 3 different points. One is the Hobby Lobby ruling, which, as Senator Merkley pointed out, pulls together all of our least favorite things. A misinterpretation of religious liberty, that means you get to actually impose your religious beliefs on people, in this case specifically women, and their choice of reproductive health care and contraception, which also goes to corporations as people having control over their workers. The second ruling he had, which is really interesting, is a ruling siding with the governor of Utah on defunding Planned Parenthood. And one of the reasons that this ruling is particularly interesting is because he justified it based on the widely debunked videos that came out 2 summers ago after the videos had been debunked. So we're living in an environment of fake news, and we have a justice who is looking to fake news to justify his ruling. And the third, which is a little more complicated, is he has extensive writings opposing right to die. Now, the origins of the opposition of right to die are based in what we know in the movement is the personhood, the ideology, which basically says that every single thing we consider as life has to be protected by any means possible. And so almost never have we seen a huge advocate saying people should not have the right to die with dignity on their own terms that doesn't also advocate for life begins at conception, and that life must be protected through any means possible, including overturning Roe versus Wade.
Excellent. Thanks for that extensive response. A little bit of that was sort of coming in and out because I think perhaps you moved a little bit in the airport. So if you can maybe see if you can move back to where you were before, that might help. But your response was still clear. So thank you so much for that. The next question comes from Pamela Fetters from Havertown, Pennsylvania. She wrote this into us, and this is for you, Senator Merkley. She really wants to see the committee ask Gorsuch whether, as a strict constitutionalist, he believes that President Obama's nominee to the Supreme Court should have been given a hearing by Congress. I'm interested to hear what you think about that tactic of going after Gorsuch as a strict constitutionalist. How can he stand by the idea that he should be a person to take over a stolen seat?
Well, Pamela, if you're on the line and listening, I completely, passionately believe this is a great question for him. It's a question I said I would ask if he would come and visit me in my office, and he chose not to come and visit me in my office. I wanted to know why he didn't turn down the seat, given that the Senate had failed and that this process failed to do its responsibility under the Constitution with Merrick Garland, and that this process of stealing a seat in this fashion would so damage the court because it is a court-packing strategy. Why would he be party to the desecration of the integrity of the court. Why wouldn't he stand on principle and turn the nomination down and help educate the American public? I'm sure what we would hear from him would be a very unsatisfactory answer, but I do hope, and I will talk to some of the members of the judiciary to encourage them to ask just that question.
Excellent. Appreciate that. All right, I have a question from you. Actually, I lost the name of the caller. The question's about the ACA and it being overturned. I believe you're live on the call. Are you live?
Yes, I am, and greetings from the great state of New Jersey, where Democrats are still standing strong on behalf of democracy. My name is Christopher Gagliardi. I'm a youth advocate for special needs. As a person with autism, the Affordable Care Act has done so much for us, Senator Merkley, and I was wondering how can I, as a person with special needs, fight to keep the ACA standing strong for those families who have children on the autism spectrum disorder?
Yes, well, I tell you, sharing your passion and your story and the work that you do, all of that is very effective in speaking to your members of Congress, in this case both the House and Senate members, sharing your story. We have so many members who are in the House who have voted dozens and dozens of times to repeal the ACA, knowing that it wasn't going to happen, and they put no weight to it. And suddenly, years later, they find out, oh, the ACA has done all these wonderful things, and but they had pledged to vote against it. So now they need to hear from citizens who say, be a responsible politician, a responsible representative of our House district or of our state, and consider this, and then tell your story to those individuals.
Fantastic. This has been a great conversation. Before we wrap up, I definitely want to give both you and Ilyse a chance to sort of close us out a little bit here. Ilyse, you have something you want to say about what people can do next, to where they should go, and maybe give them the exact address for NARAL's website?
Yep. Please join us at both www.peoplesdefense.org as well as www.naral.org. And just don't give up the fight. We're in it for the long haul. These decisions have a lifetime of repercussions. Your voices matter more than anything. And together we're in it. Together we'll win it. So thank you so much.
Excellent. And Senator Merkley, you got some wrapping up to do?
Well, thank you, Charles and Jim, and thank you, Ilyse. But mostly, again, thank all of you. I thank all of you who are on the call. A democratic republic doesn't work very well if people aren't engaged, and clearly we weren't engaged enough last year for the general election. But that has certainly changed. I've had a lot of town halls this year. I do 36 every year, and I must say it's a completely different world out there, with people saying, what can I do, or here's the 5 things I've done, what are the next 5? And so I just applaud that completely. And being on this call, and so you get information about this critical issue on the Supreme Court, is so important. Now take that information and act. Place a call tomorrow to each of your senators. Put something up on your social media that encourages your friends and family members in other states to act. Call your national association for whatever profession you're in and ask them to act. Do a person-to-person calling that Ilyse was talking about that NARAL has organized on their website, and call folks in other states to encourage them to call their senators. Take and just say to yourself right now, I'm going to do at least 3 things tomorrow to advance this battle, and that's the type of action we need to be able to win this. And if we don't win it, the consequences are extraordinary in so many fields: anti-reproductive rights, anti-labor and worker, anti-consumer choice, pro-dark money. It's like 10 important bills all rolled in together, and realize that this Supreme Court nominee, if he's confirmed, will be on the court for potentially 4 to 5 decades. This is a big deal, and so let's all go out there and fight this battle and win this battle.
That's fantastic. I'm going to add at least one more thing directly in support of Senator Merkley. One more thing you can do is you can contribute to Senate Democrats when they stand up and do the right thing. Jeff Merkley has been fighting very hard for this. He's stood up since before anyone else to say that we needed to filibuster this nominee, before this nominee was even chosen because of the point of the stolen seats, because he gets it, and we need to support that kind of bold leadership. And we need to support that kind of bold leadership as it happens over the next couple weeks. The next couple days, over the next couple hours, as people stand up and they do the right thing, do it in every way you can. So when we talk about calling on people and telling them to be strong, let's also remember that we want to reward them when they are. So it's not a problem to call Senator Schumer's office, for example, and say, I'm so glad to hear you say you want to stand up to this because of the FBI investigation. I'm depending on you to do that. Thank you for doing it. And then senators with bold leadership like Merkley don't hesitate to also contribute to their campaigns. So as you heard from Senator Merkley, all the Senate Democrats need to stand together in opposition to Near Gorsuch. If you haven't done so already, you can sign our petition standing with Senator Merkley by going to democracyforamerica.com/filibuster. And as you heard from Ilyse Hogue, the news of the FBI investigation into the ties between Russia and the Trump campaign calls into serious questions, even holding hearings on this pick. Under no circumstances should we allow a president to permanently alter the makeup of the Supreme Court while under active investigation by the FBI for collusion with a foreign country over their own election. We need to tell the Senate to shut this process down until we all have all the facts about Trump and Russia. So tomorrow you'll receive an email from DFA with a petition calling on the U.S. Senate to halt the confirmation process until the Trump-Russian investigation is over, and then we'll deliver it. You can sign that petition now, though, by going to democracyforamerica.com/Russia. Now, we're already seeing this incredible impact of the protests, the rallies, and the backlash to Donald Trump. Defeating Neil Gorsuch is a critical next step in our work to resist his agenda. So let's go out there, let's do everything we can, and let's not stop until we've won or we've fought tooth and nail to the end. Thank you very much for being a part of this call, and thank you for being a DFA member. Good night.
Thank you all, and take care.